Maybe we should explain uh, what we're doing
Mm-hmm.
for like our podcast, because I think this we can call it like our first one, because like we're actually doing like the main the meat and potato. We got the meat in. Yesterday we had just, or last week we had just the potatoes, but now we got the meat.
Yeah, no,
Um,
no more starch. No
yeah,
more carbs. We're going
yeah,
straight for the
straight for the
protein.
the beef. Um,
Sounds
but
good.
yeah, essentially what we're gonna do is we're going to. So last week I picked the topic or whatever. It was a podcast that I wanted to show and share with Dan, because I cared about it and I wanted to tell Dan. And so he watched it and I watched it and we took some notey notes right here. Naughty notes. Um, and we're just going to talk about it and share our thoughts about it. And then the next week, Dan can pick a topic that he cares about, and I can watch it, and we can do it again. And maybe talk about some cool ideas along the way.
Yeah.
Um,
So far we're a podcast responding to podcast,
yes. Yes.
but it might not always be a podcast.
Yes. No new information here. Only old information that has been previously talked about. No,
Mm-hmm.
but we will be sharing our thoughts on it. Um, so I guess I can talk about what we watched. So we watched the first episode of a podcast called The Portal by Dr. Eric Weinstein. He's kind of my academic idol, just because he doesn't really, well, he's not even really a part of academia. He's kind of one of my intellectual idols, because he's kind of part of a dying breed of people these days who are kind of like polymaths, where they are interested in a lot of different things. I think in academia specifically these days, people are often, and it's really not anyone's fault, but because now the knowledge pool of the whole world is so vast, it's very difficult to be highly educated in like many subjects. Um, but what a polymath is, they are very educated in many different subjects, and not just like many different areas of chemistry or something, but like chemistry, economics, music, like all of, like across the board really. And
Yeah.
that's definitely like an idea that interests me a lot, and that's why he interests me a lot. Um, but maybe I can frame kind of what they talked about in the episode. But in the beginning, they introduced the idea of stagnation in science, and essentially their argument is, and they use one analogy that I really like, but the analogy of the Star Trek, the how we have our society, if we kind of compare our understanding to like the technology in Star Trek, how we have the supercomputer on the Enterprise. We have the big fancy silicon semiconductors, all that kind of good stuff. But we don't have things like the warp drive, for example.
You
We
don't even
don't,
have your video conferencing technology.
yeah, we don't
Where it
have,
works seamlessly with Alien.
yeah, like we don't have maybe I don't know the type of shielding system they use on the Enterprise, but I'm sure they have some fancy shields there. But essentially, the analogy is that um, over the last, I guess, 40 years, we've been we've seen great advance in computer technology, from the semiconductor and upwards to like the internet, and then the mobile web, and that sort of thing. However, when it comes to our understanding of the atom and things smaller than the atom. It's been relative. Our understanding has been relatively the same um, since about the 1970s with our discovery of the quark. Um, I am in no way an expert in this sort of stuff, but I believe they've also like learned about the neutrino and that sort of thing. So I'm sure if we got Kevin Q on here, maybe he'd be a good future guest, and he could tell it. That would actually be awesome, because he's probably in
Yeah.
the thick of it. He's over in Indiana, right? Indiana
Yeah.
University.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think so.
so he'd actually be awesome, an awesome person to talk to. But
Yeah, and I think he was considering particle physics at one point, but I think
yeah,
he's now into like high energy physics or something like that.
yeah. I remember I had him once. We were sitting in the ISB, and I just had him give me like a very layman's description of what is it, the Standard Model, and I
Yeah.
learned about the muon, and that was my favorite one, definitely. But that's about all I remember from that. Um, particle physics is, yeah, I don't know, but yeah, essentially we've had this kind of lack of progress in kind of the subatomic realm. In addition to that, one interesting thing they talked about was why that is, and whether it's a cultural artifact or kind of the fact that maybe nature is potentially running out of kind of
Low-hanging fruit.
yeah, the low hanging fruit. And for example, our understanding of the quark doesn't we haven't really figured out any industrial applications to the up and down quarks, at
Yeah.
least to my knowledge. Um, so that's kind of the issue, uh, a very broad description. And maybe I can ask you, Dan, what you think of that and what you saw.
Well, obviously I can't speak to like particle physics very
Mm-hmm.
much in detail. I mean, I find that stuff really interesting, but I don't know much about it.
Same.
Um, yeah, I I tend to think that it's more of a lack of low-hanging fruit problem than anything else.
Yeah.
And also that just because we make a scientific discovery, it doesn't necessarily mean there's an obvious industry application for it.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't mean there is a profitable application for it. Like, I
Mm-hmm.
think it takes like a tremendous amount of like experimental precision and energy to even observe quarks.
Yeah.
So, getting that into an industry application would be prohibitively expensive.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I tend to
Yeah.
be more on that side of the fence, but I understand the argument for why it might be a cultural thing, um, and also the argument that it might be because there's just so much knowledge out there. It's
Mm-hmm.
difficult to grok more than a very specialized field.
Did I
Um,
keep going?
yeah. So, and I think a lot of fundamental discoveries are made by people who are polymaths, like you're talking about,
Mm-hmm.
because they can sort of see things from different perspectives. Like maybe
Yeah.
someone has the perspective of math and chemistry and physics and can make a fundamental discovery in one of those fields as a result, just from having some sort of unique perspective that their colleagues might not. And I actually sort of identify as a polymath, at least when I was in grad school. I'm no longer
Mm-hmm.
so studious, but I think I get that argument. It
Yeah.
intuitively makes sense to me.
Did we talk a whole lot about like the argument for it being a cultural derangement, as to why we're not like utilizing that subatomic knowledge?
I don't think
Or
so.
I guess the argument is, was it specifically um, that more of it because there was a lack of industrial application? Is that why we've shied away from it? Is that what you kind of got from that?
Um,
Or we ran out of like people I'm not super clear on the cultural aspect of it, but I think it was because it's kind of the chicken or the egg thing. If we ran out of those low hanging fruit, or we kind of shied away from like venturing forward, I guess, because of its lack of fruit, I guess, for industry.
Yeah.
But
Well, one thing is about the specialization point. There may still exist low-hanging fruit, but those may be outside of the specializations that exist right now.
yeah,
Like we become so specialized, I think we are blind to certain problems that might be pretty easy.
yeah. Um, Maybe we can venture forth into because one thing I mentioned was the stagnation in science specifically, but then they go into how that kind of stagnation is kind of a part of a larger system. They refer to it as like the institution. Um, and what are your thoughts on that? Maybe I can frame it, but essentially, I mentioned the very high amount of specialization that goes on, really across the board. But I think we'll mainly talk about like the university and kind of academia, because I mean, me and Dan are kind of been a part of that for a while. So essentially, because the knowledge base is so vast now, biochemists are told to stick to biochemistry, physicists stick to physics, computer scientists, and really, I I kind of see this to be true also, but um, everyone's saying everything's going great. Biochemists, it seems like every year they're saying, "Oh, we're right. We're gonna have the cure to cancer this year," and it seems like we've been saying that for a decade. Um, and nobody else, because everyone's so highly specialized, nobody has the authority to question anybody really. Maybe I can ask you, what has been your have you observed anything like this in computer science? Because that's been one of the more booming fields, I guess.
Yeah, so I'll say two different things. The first is that you said that people in a discipline usually are told to stick to that discipline.
Yeah.
I would agree with that for the most part, except that in computer science, it's heavily application focused,
Mm-hmm.
heavily application oriented. So computer scientists are often reaching out to people of other fields and sometimes even, immerse themselves in the subject matter. Like completely, like computational neuroscientists, for example, are often people with computer science backgrounds that grok a whole bunch of neuroscience knowledge and then can make a non-trivial contribution to neuroscience.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I see your point. Like most fields are, told to stick to what they know. Um, and then we were talking about, how everything is supposedly great all the time. Is that what you're wondering about?
Yeah, that we're in a this constant. I believe they refer to it as the embedded growth obligation.
Yeah,
That where everything is booming, the growth is accelerating, the knowledge is accelerating, all of these things, but it's more of a kind of what the institution is just trying to put off into the atmosphere and kind of the
yeah,
wavelengths so that they can maintain funding essentially.
yeah.
Um,
So I think this makes sense if you ask someone like Eric Weinstein or Peter Thiel, because they're rich people. They're patrons of science to some extent. Um, so like the people that they're patronizing, scientists,
mhm,
they need money. So of course they're going to say, we're doing great. Keep giving us money. We're going to keep producing great science. But I think
mhm,
if you ask, if you're like in a lab or you're a member of the scientific community and you ask people about their perspective on these things, you usually get a more honest perspective. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I did not have that experience. My PI was kind of uh, crooked ethically. Like he would do anything to get like a grant. He would basically say anything in our presentations to get like grant funding.
Mm-hmm.
But I I was fairly active in like the science Twitter community, and there seems to be like healthy reflection on the fact that there isn't progress being made in certain fields. There are problems with the granting process, um, stuff of that nature.
Yeah. Yeah, my experience with my PI the last couple years is I think biochemistry is an exception because it is one of the more booming industries in like the atomic field. There's, I mean, obviously tons of applications uh, when it comes to human physiology and drugs and all of that. It's, we all know how big of an industry that is. Allergy meds, but
Yeah,
and we didn't even do any direct like drug discovery or anything like that. We were doing primary research, just studying uh, proteins that we have in our brains were responsible for things like memory formation and that kind of stuff. But um, and I think in terms of like the discoveries that were going on in our lab, it's not like anything was like super cutting edge really. Like we used techniques that have like been widely established and really just to uh, dig into a lot of biochemistry is just trying to figure out the shape and structure of the characters, the players in the game, the proteins really, because those are essentially what makes your cells work. They're the communicators of the cell. It's the machinery of the cells. So if we figure out the shapes of those machines, we can target them with drugs and all that stuff. So we were just doing the work to figure out really the shapes of those proteins. But a lot of the reason that like our PI was targeting that specific protein and doing the types of studies we were doing is because it was like a good route to gain funding from grants.
yeah,
And
it's low risk science.
yeah, it wasn't like anything disruptive or anything like that. It was a lot of what grant writers look for is stuff that is gonna work, um, because it's a grant is essentially an investment, and they don't want to be investing in something that is not that isn't gonna pan out well, and that might also contribute to the I guess the stagnation is the kind of lack of risk that people might be willing to take. I will say it's very difficult to or I kind of I get it that I feel like I'm criticizing a system that like I'm 23 years old and like I haven't been in the game that long, but
Yep.
it seems like that's kind of what young people do in general. And I'm noticing this theme of like how most young people are progressives or Democrats or whatever, and then older people typically are more conservative, I guess. And that might be because younger people we don't have I don't have the knowledge to fully understand like the system that I'm critiquing, but I like know enough to be able to critique it. Um,
Yeah.
so it's like this difficult.
We also have less to lose.
Yeah, yeah. The I oftentimes over the last 2 years I've felt like this amount of shame kind of feel like I kind of always felt like a black sheep in the herd of white in the research lab, and I felt bad critiquing a system that essentially, like, I had no like, I didn't build that system. Like, my PI built that lab essentially, and she did all of the hard work to establish that, um, to get her grant. Essentially, it was like $1 million grant and yada yada, and I was sustained off of that grant, and I felt bad, like, like fully being bought in, while, like,
Mhm.
that system was sustaining me essentially. Um, I'm watching Twitch, and it's hard to like, people are commenting and yada yada yada, but
Oh, yeah.
I'm
Like some
finding
viewer.
yeah, I'm finding I'm gonna get distracted trying to read it, um, rather than, like, keep the conversation going. So maybe that'll be a kink I have to work out in the future, but they'll have to just talk amongst themselves for now, because I wanna focus on Dan, but
Yeah, so about that point, I actually think a sign of a healthy lab is that, there are members who are willing to take risks, especially the students, because, like I said, they have less to lose. They don't really have a reputation yet. They haven't published a bunch of papers. They don't have a lab. The
yeah.
PI is someone who takes on a lot of risk. They've established a lab. They've secured a lot of funding. So basically, they've got you, like, sheltered in their lab, and they've got you
Hmm.
employed to do basic research. And yes, you do have to contribute to their projects that will generate grant funding, but you also have some time and some freedom to pursue more risky ideas because
Hmm.
you just do. You
Yeah.
don't have to write grants.
Yeah.
So I think it's healthy to question like motivations. And if you make a breakthrough in your own time, obviously it's not so easy in like biochemistry, but it is in computer science. Then you can
Hmm.
publish that, and you can build your own uh, risk shelter.
Hmm.
I guess I don't know if that's a good thing.
Yeah. One of the things that Peter mentioned, a lot of the stuff, and I remember watching this podcast. I think it was kind of it must have been in the fall of last year, and it was right when I was writing my application to a PhD program, and it made me, like, it made me question a lot of things during a time where I didn't really want to be questioning, like, the kind of the effectiveness of a PhD, when I was, like, in the middle of applying one, and actually I wanted to write a lot about it in my application, like my statement of purpose or whatever. Um, but I think I had to, like, tone it back just because my PI advised not shitting on the system that I was essentially trying to join. But he talked about how he mentioned, where do I begin, the the system of, well, maybe we can just talk about the PhD in general, but he talked a lot about how it's very crowded, first off, and there's this kind of idea that if you get a PhD, like, you're on a track to becoming a professor and that sort of thing. Um, but that, and it's honestly, it's not even that, like, hidden or anything, but, if out of, like, 100 PhDs, one will become a professor. And I think that's kind of the fake promise that the degree, it kind of gives this illusion, um, due to the crowded nature of it. and it's like viewed as this big valuable degree, but it's seeing the same problem that undergrad is seeing now, where the fact that everyone is going towards it and society pushes everyone towards it, the more people who are doing it, it loses its value. Um,
Yeah. It's interesting though because in some fields people will get a PhD to get like, advanced industry jobs, whereas in
mhm.
others the only option is to become a professor after getting a PhD or otherwise teach, but you could do the same by getting like a master's degree.
Mhm. And the PhD, even going into industry, even with a PhD, you're put into a essentially a team where you don't have this creative freedom that it kind of gives off this um, kind of aura of. You're again put into a team that already has a predetermined goal, a research target,
Yeah,
and
culture.
yeah, and that's honestly the biggest fear I have with this pursuing this degree is I'm going to be joining this system that doesn't permit out of the box ideas where they want me to just pursue this target, this kind of pathway, and I don't know. It makes me nervous, I guess.
Yeah, I think it also depends on, the culture of the lab you're joining.
Yeah.
I don't know what it's like in biochemistry, but I know some labs in computer science, the graduate students have a lot more power in
Mm-hmm.
deciding like what their what their man hours are working towards.
Mm-hmm.
Some labs are just like completely laser focused on the PIs granting projects goals, whereas others, especially others with a lot of lab members, they can divert people to just like creative tasks, creative research,
Mm-hmm.
exploratory stuff.
Yeah. I'm gonna try checking out my notes because really I just wanted to note down like interesting things they said that made me think. Um, let's see. One thing that they started to talk about was because we're specifically talking about like this stagnation in academia and all of that, but they also talked about how it this idea of the institution extends really all throughout society, and I definitely noticed that they make the analogy of like pro wrestling versus like the WWE or like real wrestling, um, and how there's this kind of gated community of one example is the acting opportunities in like Los Angeles or something. Like 1,000 people might move to LA to become an actor, and they said maybe 20 will make it, and those 20 are obviously going to say, "Oh, moving to LA was great. There's like everything's wonderful. I like the opportunities are bountiful, and the rest are left kind of amongst themselves." And it's you can extend that to opportunities as a professor and the tenure system. If you're going for tenure and you make it, you're most likely going to say, "Oh, the tenure system is great. It's definitely built on merit. Uh,
I don't know
it's
about that.
right, and that's
I
the
don't think
thing."
I don't think most tenured folks say that. Is what I mean.
Oh, what do you think?
I think if you ask the average tenured person, they would probably be like, "Yeah, the system is pretty broken."
Hmm. Did
This,
your What?
Did my PI say that?
Yeah.
Is that well? He wasn't really like a guy you would talk to. He was really
Mm-hmm.
strange. He's just like not a personable guy. He only talked about like the projects.
Yeah. Where do you get this? Where do you get that impression from?
Honestly, science Twitter.
Hmm.
Probably gonna keep looping back to that as a primary source.
Yeah.
But a lot of like pretty reputable people in computer science at least
Mm-hmm.
are very open about how broken and
Hmm.
difficult it is to get into the tenure system.
Hmm. That's
It
probably.
seems that way in physics too. I know a couple people in physics.
Well, that's good. Well, this is good to hear then, because yeah, maybe I should join the science Twitter community just to check
Yeah,
out what people are saying. But
yeah. Twitter is kind of like hit or miss, but
mm-hmm.
it's very useful for. Um, I think it's very useful for like water cooler discussions with other scientists.
Mm-hmm.
Water cooler.
Yeah. So you also took some notes. Do you have any things you want to discuss?
Let me look. Oh yeah, I noted down that like Teal didn't talk about like academic grants. So, and
Mm-hmm.
I sort of wanted to mention this earlier, but um, getting grants is like a really perverse incentive. And we touched on how a lot of people will do low risk science.
Mm-hmm.
That basically, take like a very small step in the direction that the field is already heading so that they
Mm-hmm.
can secure grant funding. They're like, oh, well, we discovered this thing last year. Let's keep working on that same thing and maybe we'll make some progress.
Yeah.
And I think that's how like the majority of grants work.
Mm-hmm.
But um, then the onus is on people like DARPA. And you know
Mm-hmm.
what DARPA is?
The military, essentially, the military rewarding grants, sorta.
There's like DARPA, there's IARPA, there's the NSF, and there's so on. But like the onus is on those people to, figure out a way to give grants to people who are going to take risks, and give grants to people that don't already have a lot of money, um, and yeah, basically it's their job to be that other end of the perverse incentive, um, such that it's no longer so perverse.
Mm-hmm.
But that's like a really hard problem, right? Like there are always going to be incentives when it comes down to like work. Like people need to get paid and so
Mm-hmm.
on. So the problem of like who to give grant money to is a really fundamental one, I think, in science. And they didn't really talk about that in the podcast.
Mm. Do you feel like, because you've worked with DARPA a little bit, do you feel like they do that?
The people I worked with at DARPA were extremely incompetent. uh, so they're like, I think they're called like program managers or something like that. And basically, what they do is number one, they review grant applications, and then two, they'll like come and meet with you on like a regular basis. Our program manager came once a quarter, and he brought like a couple other people with him, and they just like asked us a bunch of questions, and we did presentations for them, and we clearly weren't making any good progress, but they kept
Mm-hmm.
funding us.
Yeah.
So like in that situation, I mean I'm glad that I still got paid to do research,
Yeah.
but if I were in their shoes, I would be like, maybe let's give grant money to somebody else.
Mm. Interesting.
But I also understand like taking away grant money from somebody, that's a hard thing to do, right?
It's a
Because
big deal, yeah.
you're messing with people's livelihoods.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's yeah, definitely a complicated problem. mm. Hmm. Did you?
I think some
Yeah.
people do like a lottery system, which is like the other end of the spectrum, where out of all the grant applications, they fund like a couple randomly selected folks.
Hmm. Do you know who does that, or have you just heard about that system?
I've just heard about it. I don't know if it's actually implemented or if it was just an idea, but
Mm,
I'm sure there's some way you have to qualify for the lottery in the first place. Like you can't just be some Joe Schro. Yeah.
yeah. um, do you think they should make PhD programs more, or their application, who they admit, more stringent?
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, maybe. Some people just do a PhD to do a PhD. They're not necessarily trying to get a tenured professorship.
Yeah, I don't think I am either. Um, I don't know if it's hard because I know I want to be a teacher, but I don't know if becoming a professor is like the best way to do that, which is kind of a little. You would think it's a little backwards, but I'm afraid becoming a professor would essentially pigeonhole me into having to teach a certain curriculum, and it's definitely it's like the traditional route, but I don't I don't know. It's also highly competitive,
Yeah. Well,
and
that's another thing. For your field, getting a PhD is really competitive. But do you know how competitive it is in other fields, especially those that are not STEM, which don't
yeah,
have like big money incentives?
I it's probably not as competitive.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it's a it's a tough problem. Um, did you listen to the part about? I think his name was Bob Laughlin. He was like a professor at Stanford.
Yep. Yep.
I thought that was pretty interesting. How they talked about um, how essentially what went on was there was a professor at Stanford. I believe he wasn't an I don't know if he was. I don't know what he was like specialized in, but he
I think
essentially
he was.
was. Huh?
I think he was a physicist.
Okay, yeah, yeah. I think he was. Um,
Yep.
but
Like
he
that.
was awarded the Nobel Prize, and he um, kind of fell under this idea that that gave him the privilege to pretty much do anything he wanted in academia, and he used that power to begin to start critiquing other departments at Stanford.
Yeah.
And he
Did he
started
the
with
biology
the
part?
yeah, the biology department, and it didn't work out. Essentially, he's as soon as he started critiquing other fields, I don't know if they didn't say if he was fired or not, but I believe they said his grad students were no longer like advancing through.
Yeah.
His grant funding got removed, that sort of thing. And I thought it was interesting when they talked about how not many people are per they can talk about the parts of the system, the area that they specialize in, but not many people are kind of allowed to talk about the whole, and the whole being like, yeah, this idea of um, kind of the overall health of like science progressing, society, really all of the parts. And they talk about how that job is kind of left up to like the university president. Um,
Yeah.
but
That was super interesting.
yeah, oftentimes like presidents of a university are not obligated to be talking negatively about anything really.
Yeah, they're
Um,
not incentivized to be, right?
right.
If they,
Um,
if they talk down on their performance and, their competing university doesn't, then,
mm-hmm.
the competing university might get more students or more funding or what have you.
Yeah. Criticizing themselves, yeah, is self-destructive
Yeah.
in a very it's a very pathological system. Lots of lying and stuff like that.
Yeah, but I think they said in the podcast, in the long run, it's a self-destructive strategy to do what we're doing now, which is just
Right.
lying about progress and performance.
Right. They kept referring to this whole kind of sequence of events as the Truman Show, or the Truman Show can't go on uh, for much longer. I honestly I don't even know. I believe using my context clues, the Truman Show is some type of like magic show. It's some I don't even know what. Do you know what it
No,
is?
yeah. So I can talk about this. So it's
Yes.
the Jim Carrey movie, The Truman Show,
Okay.
and Jim Carrey plays Truman, I believe. And what
Mm-hmm.
happens is they construct this like artificial world
Mm.
in which he's born. It's like he's enclosed in this like big metal enclosure,
Yeah.
but they like basically everybody inside of the world is like a paid actor, and they have
Mm-hmm.
cameras everywhere, so they capture like every moment of his life, and everyone pretends like it's the real world, but it's
Yeah.
just like it's all for a TV show. And
Yeah.
then one day he finds out that it's all fake and he escapes. And it's a good movie. You should watch it.
Yeah. Well, that makes a lot of sense. Similar to I guess the Matrix, that sort of thing. But the fact that it's filmed in a box, that makes a lot of sense. Um, mm, yeah. Mm, do you have anything you wanted to talk about in your notes? More? I have
All
some
right.
things, but I wanted to give you the floor.
Yeah, there's definitely some more stuff here.
Mm-hmm.
So, hmm, I mean, one thought that just occurred to me while I was watching this is that it should be pretty obvious that we need to distribute more of the grant money directly to the trainees, like
Mm-hmm.
PhD students. Like they're talking about how PhD students are like, all living in like the same apartment and they had to fight over lab equipment and they're all like poor as heck and have to delay their lives in
Mm-hmm.
order to get an advanced degree. But they're
Mm-hmm.
a lot of them are doing great work. So to incentivize like, you know, high performers, like when you want when you want like highly skilled workers, like smart people to work in your industry,
Mm-hmm.
you pay them well.
Yeah.
And PhDs are like paid the worst. So they're just like making a ton of personal sacrifice so they can contribute to science. And if you really want quality contributions to science, you should pay the trainees well so they'll show up.
I guess they the idea is the opportunity to be and this is kind of my understanding of it, the um the reason maybe grad students and PIs why it's allowed or permitted for grad students to be paid so poorly, especially for the hours they're putting in, is it's kind of like it's like a rare or special opportunity to be making a living, like studying science and that sort of
Yeah,
thing. Do
sure.
you think that's a part of it?
It's totally a part of it, but I mean, that's sort of it's sort of a gateway for poor people. Like if you've done undergrad and you've done well, let's just say you've done undergrad and you're relatively poor, then you've probably got a bunch of student loans. And then if you go do a PhD and you're not really being paid enough to, pay down those loans or start planning like a family or a future, then are you going to stick around for 5 to 10 years or
Mm-hmm.
whatever it is, 4 to 8 years, more like?
Yeah.
That's one of the major reasons I got out. I'm not like poor, but like I'm not well off, and the
Mm-hmm.
prospect of not having savings for the next 5 to 6 years was really scary.
That was your reasoning for not doing the PhD.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
that's one big reason. Yeah.
Yeah. One thing that they talked about that was kind of alarming to me maybe was these specifically the undergrad degree, how people are leaving in six-figure debt, and how it almost feeds you into the system in a way where once you get that degree, you need to essentially get a job that pays you well enough where you can start to pay off that debt, but it's not necessarily a job that is you're allowed to have this creative freedom, or you're kind of like implanted as a cog in a system. And the college debt thing is one thing I thought about for a brief second is with this just kind of talking about a podcast. I wonder how, because I've been thinking about how I'm trying to be weary of like not just regurgitating the stuff they say, because like if we do that, why don't people just like listen to what they said, because they can say it much more eloquently than I can. So I'm wondering maybe we should limit it to like us reflecting on it, and maybe like how it might impact us specifically. But anywho, we can.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly think that's kind of what we're doing already, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we've just been talking about like 2 or 3 or 4 points up until now.
Yeah.
Digging into them.
Yeah, I think it was a flaw in my note taking. I was jotting down kind of the points that they made, but maybe I need to jot down how I feel about those points a little more. That might be a better idea.
I did a little bit of that. I have like these starred notes where they're just like my thoughts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One thing that I totally sympathized with is Peter Thiel talked about how his motivation in academia was the highest in high school. And how ever since then it has been in a constant decline. I'm actually not familiar. He did his undergrad? Does he have a PhD? Did he do that whole thing?
I don't think so.
No. Yeah. But yeah, I totally feel the same way. And actually, my peak motivation was probably in undergrad. High school, I didn't know why I wasn't being thoughtful as to any of why I was doing anything. I think I was most motivated towards drumming in high school. Honestly, that was that was kind of like my major outlet. And I remember even when it came time to think about college, I just wanted to like go to Bridgewater State to get a teaching degree, and while I was doing that, be a tech at Dartmouth High School and like that kind of stuff. And I'm very glad my parents convinced me to go to college or like get the whole kind of 4-year science degree, just because I discovered a lot of other things that I'm kind of interested in. But I looked a little bit into they talked about the Thiel Fellowship, where they award people that like essentially they incentivize people to drop out of college, or if they're admitted to college, to drop out and kind of pursue like whatever idea they have that they wrote about in their application. I guess it's for undergrads only. There's an age limit of 22, but yeah, I think that's pretty interesting. I'm pretty sure it's very competitive also. They don't let Joe Schmo get like, I think they award it was like 100,000 over 2 years, something like that.
Yeah, I think so. I just looked it up, and Thiel also has a JD from Stanford.
Okay. Oh yeah, a law degree. Yeah.
Yeah. I forgot to mention this earlier, but
Mm-hmm.
Peter Thiel, if you've ever watched the show Silicon Valley on HBO,
Mm-hmm.
one of the characters in that show is just like it's like it's a prototype of him. They're just like making fun of him. And
Oh
the
yeah.
guy on the TV show has like he has a fellowship program, which
Mm-hmm.
if you drop out of college, you get $100,000.
Yeah. Hmm. Do you see yourself because now you've spent some time out of college and academia? Do you see yourself going back at all at this point?
No, probably not. I mean, if I went back, it would probably be for a PhD because that's the next step, right?
Right.
Um, and that could take 4 to 6 years or whatever. And as someone who grew up without a lot of money and
Mm-hmm.
now starting to work and starting to save, I can't picture going back to being so broke.
Yeah.
Unless I had like a big windfall, like somebody gave me a couple $1 million and I was like, okay, I'm ready for retirement.
Yeah.
Then maybe I'll go back for a PhD.
Yeah.
But even then, it would be hard to like get motivated because I have retirement money in the bank. So what's the
Mm-hmm.
point of
Yeah. Mm. Yeah.
so, if you do find something that you really do love working on, totally get it. Totally get the draw of the PhD.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I've been studying lately, and I do these tomato timers where it's some variation of some technique where you set a timer for 25 minutes, and the idea is you like put your phone away, and it's a totally undistracted productivity time, and then you take like a 5 minute break and keep doing that, yada yada yada. And honestly, I've just been doing like two a day, but lately I've found like today I did my two or whatever, and just kept going because I wanted to like finish what I was doing. So that gives me like hope that what I'm doing is not I'm not like I'm not like delusional about where my interests lie, I guess.
Yeah,
Um, but I'm gonna be doing a lot more than two tomato timers in grad school. So that we're gonna see how it is. We will see. But
yeah. Learning can be addictive, but it can also be like you can also get burned out on it really.
I'm nervous about learning about one subject uh, continuously, just like because I am interested in a lot of other things, and I'm afraid that grad school is going to require like all of my time devoted towards one subject. And yeah, they made at one point during the podcast that the people who are interested in more than one thing, um, they said like if you're a computer science but you're interested in like music or any other field, it just means that you're not that serious about computer science, and that resonated with me pretty hard because I've experienced that in like the last 2 years in the lab I was in, where the grad student, like specifically one grad student, he was a guy from Turkey. He just lived and breathed like biochemistry and the research he was doing, and like I don't want to do that, and it makes me frightful. um,
Yeah, I mean, some people are like that, but I
yeah,
think that's a pretty, honestly, I think that's a pretty rare and a pretty toxic attitude to have about research or about any kind of work. Like,
yeah,
I don't know if I've encountered anyone like that, at least in my sphere.
yeah. Maybe I've that fear was has been implanted in me just because that's what I was around. Um, but and like my PI would always yeah, it kind of it was scary trying to figure out if that was like that's definitely not the expectation, but it was kind of frightening being around that, honestly. Because there were only 3 grad students in the lab, and if honestly, if 33% of them are doing that, it can kind of set the tone of like a work environment. So I don't know, but
Yeah.
we'll see how it is. It's also going to be interesting with this COVID stuff. I guess labs are only at like allowed to be at 30% occupancy. So I don't know how that's affected productivity in the lab. I haven't been in the lab since it's begun, but
Yeah.
um, do you have um, like, because I want you to pick the topic for next time, do you have any ideas about what areas you might want to dive into?
I haven't really thought about it. I like this week's idea.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty cool. I mean, it's obviously like pretty well within our wheelhouse,
Yeah.
institutional failure or failure of universities at least.
Yeah.
Maybe not other institutions.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll have to think about it.
Yeah. I think it'd be cool to talk about something that isn't science. Maybe like something that is just more um, maybe social. I don't, whatever you want though.
Sounds
But
good.
yeah.
Maybe I'll grab a bird and bring him on the show next time.
Yeah. I'll bring my doggo and just kind of hold him hold him right here. Give him
That'll bring
pets.
him the views.
Yeah. But yeah, I think I'm content with what we've talked about this time.
Cool.
What do you
Sounds
think?
good. Yeah, play the outro music.
Bah,
Roll
bah.
the.
Yeah, but yeah, I'm much happier with doing this as just like a kind of a fun thing to do. I was
Yeah.
Yeah, it feels a lot more natural, like a hobby, kind of. Because like there
Right.
are things I want to share and talk about, but trying to like somehow make a living off of it, like, I think it would take away from the. Anyway, I don't even want to get into
Maybe
all
that's something we could talk about next week. That could be an interesting topic. Like,
that.
making your living off of the internet.
Yeah, I'm sure I definitely know all about that. But yeah, maybe we could talk about like finding out what we like to do. Something just like how we like honestly what we like to do, how we found about that stuff, why we like doing it, and kind of why we might have tried to make a career out of it. Because a lot of I notice I won't dive too much into it, but I notice with like my career or whatever, I'm not like a super nut about like organic molecules, and like I'm not passionate about like trying to develop some reaction. I don't really care like about that. It's more I really enjoy the just the activity of doing performing organic chemistry reactions, and also kind of the style of the learning, how it's very visual. So it's more applicable to more has to do with simply the activity of doing it rather than like my intellectual investment in it or something like that. But anywho, it's up to you. We don't even have to review a certain like a previous book or podcast. We could literally just pick a topic. So
Yeah.
it's up
Sounds
to
good.
you. Cool. I'm having fun though, staying in touch with you,
Yeah, me too, buddy.
Daniel. Yeah, I'm thinking I want to start essentially do the same thing, but with some of the people I marched with at the Blue Devils, um, my friend Miles.
Hmm.
He was the guy I marched next to both of my years, um, and I was on the end of the quad line, and he was the guy next to me. We did the same order both years, and I like thought about it one day, and I literally spent like 95% of my life during the summer like within like 6 feet of him because I stood next to him on the field. He was my bus partner, and we'd pretty much like the quad line would sleep together in the gym. So it was cool. It's I think it spoke a lot about our friendship, that because most people would get on each other's nerves being that close. We'd even shower
Yeah.
together. It's like it's all across the board. We'd eat together, eat, sleep, maybe not poop together, but most people do that kind of separate. So
Hmm.
you know how it is. But
Yep.
yeah,
Yep. No, that sounds familiar. I
yeah,
mean, I was in a front ensemble, so there were like 15 people.
yeah.
So
You don't even get to
exactly
like
like
move
that.
away from the people. There's
Yeah.
no yeah, yeah, yeah. I did the pit thing, and you got to hope you like the person you're standing next to, because you're gonna get a whole lot of that.
Yep.
um, for when I played marimba, I stood next to Dan Monty, so that was a good time. Shout out to Dan Monty. uh,
I I actually have been playing like Call of Duty with Dan Monty recently. Not
oh yeah,
like not super recently, but like when the quarantine started, Cole, Dan. I shouldn't be like naming people on this podcast, should I? Anyways,
I
Cole,
I
Dan.
think we can name people. We probably just maybe we should keep any true feelings or something like that to ourselves. I don't know.
We just don't dox them.
Yeah,
Tell everybody their
yeah,
address. Yeah, but yeah, we were playing like Call of Duty Warzone like religiously for a little while
nice.
there.
Yeah, I actually haven't played that like once, but it looks like a lot of fun. I've heard it's really good. I'm a
Yeah,
Counter Strike boy. That's my problem. The competitiveness of it, it's like it. Honestly, it's like any other drug. It's like that. It's intense. The intense moments. It's very extreme.
yeah.
Um,
I totally get that
yeah,
in Valorant.
yeah, but cool. All right. I guess we can hit the exit button now. So,
Okay,
all right. It was good talking to you, Dan.
you too.
All
I'll
right.
see you next week.
See you next time on I think I'm gonna call this whatever we're doing Discording with Dan.
Okay,
That's what I'll call it.
all right. I like it.
Cool. All right. Bye.
Bye bye.
Cool.